seminarene. Ikke per seminar, men for en pakkepris for alt. 100 for ikke. Så de av dere som har dårlig samvittighet som ikke betalte, det er ikke noe farlig. Se seminaret, og så går du til å betale. God fornøyelse, og gi en stor applaus til Spencer Pollard.
Morning, everybody. Are we all well?
Yes.
Okay. I take it you all speak English?
No.
Because my Norwegian's dreadful. Yeah? Can you all hear at the back? Yeah? You hear at the back? You guys? Yeah? When I was asked to do this, we tried to work out as best we could something that might be entertaining. So rather than it just be a dry, put some paint in the airbrush, press the button, spray the model kind of thing, which will take about 30 seconds. I thought we'd try and make it a little bit more interactive, and I'd try and get you involved a little bit more, and get you to kind of ask more questions and that kind of thing, show what can go wrong, show what can go right, and take it right from the basics. So I need to know a little bit before I begin, otherwise you're all going to be going, oh, I know this. So, if I can have a show of hands, how many of you use one of these things on a regular basis? Okay. How many of you have never used one of these? How many of you kind of experiment with one of these, but would rather paint with a brush? Okay, yeah? So for you guys, you'll perhaps get something from the beginning of this, and then we'll move on and try and sort of develop the ideas a little bit more as well once we get past that.
You want us to go basically now?
No, I want you to sit down. You're my target audience. In actual fact, because you're the one that's just made me laugh, you're going to be the one that's going to be helping me out through the entire demonstration.
Oh God. No, not him.
Okay?
Pick another Englishman.
He's not English.
Aren't you supposed to be watching rugby today anyway?
Rugby, what's that?
Aren't you playing today? Okay, so.
Spence, what piece do you want to do?
15, 20. Doesn't really matter, 15, 20. It's
Enjoy yourself.
Okay. These things have kind of become a staple for us now, using airbrushes for getting decent finishes, but also getting finishes quickly, rather than sitting there with a paintbrush trying to work a way around a model getting a smooth finish. This allows you to get a smooth finish in relatively short time. However, people do seem to have a mental block about them. And I hear it's too difficult to set up, I can't get the paint the right consistency, they're too difficult to clean, they're unwieldy, they're expensive, do I need a compressor, can I use cans of air? All of these kind of things are roadblocks that the models put up in front of them to stop them using these things. But here's the real rub, these are very easy tools to use. In fact, I would say that this is an easier tool to use than a paintbrush. Okay? Because it kind of takes the pressure off you when you're using one of these. If you're painting a wing of an aircraft or a turret of a tank and you've got some paint in this and you do that, it's done. The paintbrush, you're working at it. It's a constant mechanical process to get this finish smooth. Whereas with this, it's nice and easy. So the arguments to using one of these are kind of persuasive, certainly from my point of view, and I've been using one of these since I was 14. Starting off with the very basic tool that you can get, you would pay about £10 for, leading up to the high-end ones now that are produced by iWater, £250, something like that, which is what, 2,500, give or take. Trying to get my maths right. Morning. No, you. You went to bed then. Eventually. Good morning. Okay, so it's kind of a persuasive argument. Now, a number of things, and I'll show you how this works today from setting this up. I've brought 3 airbrushes along. This is my standard everyday tool. I use this all the time. There isn't when I'm building, there isn't a day goes by that I don't use this tool. This is about £130. These 1,300 krona. Please, somebody just tell me how much that is. Okay, they're about £130. However, I brought another one, which is this one. This airbrush is £40. It's produced by the airbrush company as a way of kind of getting around the internet sales of cheap knocked off Iwaters like this. And so they produced one of these. It's called the Premier G35. This is a fantastic style airbrush. It's about £35–40, and will do pretty much everything this will do, but it costs a third of the price. The only difference is manufacturing tolerances on this airbrush are not the same as on this, so it'll probably do it for a little bit less, and you'll end up having to buy spares. It doesn't have the same kind of precision, it doesn't have the same kind of feel to it. But I've sprayed models for magazine, and I've sprayed competition models with this with absolutely no problems at all. It works brilliantly. Good morning, Adam. How you doing? And it works really, really well. So you can buy and use airbrushes from that kind of price all the way up to whatever you want. You can buy artists' airbrushes.
What is that?
This one here, this is an Iwata HB. Okay, I think they're called clips.
Yeah, it's not.
Yeah. Okay. This is one of the heavier duty ones. It's got a 0.3 nozzle. It's got a heavy duty cup with it. You can see the difference between the two. Okay. This is kind of suited to general purpose use. This sort of cup would be more for detail work. If you're spraying much smaller areas, you don't want to mix as much paint. Okay. You can use something like this. You're spraying thinner materials, inks, that kind of thing, you can use something like this. But this is a good standard general purpose airbrush. This has also got a colour cup that's fixed onto the brush. You'll probably see, if you've ever used airbrushes, you can get other ones which have got separate cups that either fit to the side or fit to the top. You can have bottles that fit to the bottom. I just find that these are easier to use. You don't have that problem of the cup coming away or knocking it or whatever. It's all fixed and it fits in my hand like a pen. I've got relatively big hands for a model maker. Most model makers have got tiny little hands, but mine are like bear's hands.
Have you explained what the little thing is on the bottom yet?
Not yet.
I'm sorry.
Yeah, not yet. Please stop heckling me, I'll have to get you involved as well. Yeah, so what you've got is, it fits like a pen and you hold it as such. Okay, so they're a nice tool to have. They're brilliantly creative tools. Also, as Adam quite rightly says, some of these airbrushes have got other little tricks about them as well. The pressure that comes out of the compressor is regulated by the compressor. However, these tools here, they have their own regulators on the bottom, little nuts. These little nuts, you can undo them or tighten them up, and they will regulate the pressure within inside the brush. So if you've got a 15 psi or 20 psi running through the compressor, but you only want 5 or 10 psi running through the brush, you simply tighten this up. And it will go from wide open, 20 psi, down to nothing. You can actually seal the brush off with this. And if you press the trigger, nothing will come out to it. So you can actually, while you're working on it, and you want to change the air pressure, rather than kneeling down to the compressor, you've got it at your fingertips as well. But that's the difference between one of the high-end products, one of these kind of airbrushes, and a cheaper one like that. You don't have those kind of tricks involved. Now, when I started, I said that there were other roadblocks that get put up in front of you. And one of those roadblocks is, it takes a long time to set a brush up. It takes a long time to airbrush. I've got to, people think that they're going to spend hours picking one of these things up, getting the paint the right consistency, and then spraying it, and it's going to take forever to do that. It's nonsense. This takes no longer to use than a paintbrush. It's as simple and straightforward as that, okay? I have this sat on a bracket by the side of me, and it's always connected to the compressor, always. So if I want to spray something, I just simply take it off, put some paint in it, spray, put it back, and carry on. 30 seconds. It's no more than taking the lid off the tin of the paint, getting a stirring stick, stirring the paint up, putting that onto it, and decanting that, thinning it so that you can paint it. It genuinely isn't And I'm not saying that just because I'm a clever guy who just wants to sell you airbrushes. I'm telling you because that's a fact. The same thing is at the other end of the job. Everybody's saying, well, it takes forever to clean these things. I did a demonstration recently for a local club, and I had a guy in the, much like you, he was saying, yeah, but how long does it take you to clean this down? And I said, well, how long do you think it takes me to clean this down? And he says, well, I've heard it, 15, 20 minutes to get it all done and all cleaned out and everything. And while he was asking me the question, I cleaned the brush out and I handed it to him. And I said, the brush is clean, it's done, it's finished. And he didn't believe me, and I said, have a look at it, take it to pieces. And he said, how could you do that? And I said, because that's it, it's simple, straightforward job. Okay. So those are two roadblocks that we have over the use of an airbrush, one way or the other. Okay. Thinning paint is another area that people find difficult. There's a great rule of thumb with thinning paint through an airbrush, and that is, if you thin the paint in the colour cup and you put a paintbrush into it and lift the paintbrush out of the colour cup and you get one drip coming off the brush at a time, that paint's thin enough. If the paint runs off the brush in a constant stream, or the paint doesn't run off the brush at all, it's too thick, or it's too thin, okay? But if it just comes off and it just goes drip, 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 perfect. Simple as that. And you can judge that by eye, okay? And I'll show you how we do that. I watched my good friend Adam Wilder, watched him do some airbrushing in Spain 2 years ago. And, pretty much followed the same kind of idea. And also, the idea that you have to somehow mix the paint away from the brush, decant it into the brush, mix up lots of it and that kind of thing. You don't have to do any of that either, and I'll show you that in a minute. You can actually mix the paint in the colour cup. The thinners in, put some paint in, stir it round, test it, bang, and good to go. Okay? So we'll show that. So once you've got past those kind of hurdles, once you've got past those little roadblocks that you've got in front of you in your mind, you'll find that it's nice and straightforward and nice and easy. And actually it becomes a lot of fun because you're then able to develop techniques that perhaps you wouldn't have open to you if you were just using paintbrushes. Okay. So Zoe, before we get started on some nice basic little tricks and ideas, does anyone have any questions before I move on to actually showing? No? We're all good to go? I am going to test you all, so all those people who are sitting down and saying, I haven't got any questions, I'm going to come along and I'm going to see if you've been listening. Yeah?
Which pressure do you
I normally use between 15 and 20 psi. Okay? That's kind of a standard pressure for me. I know other people who use a lot less. Tony Greenland, in his book on building armoured vehicles, he said he never sprayed above 10 psi. He always kept it at 10 psi. I think 10 psi is too low, to be honest. And it doesn't atomise the paint properly. 15 psi is kind of perfect. But again, because I'm using this, I will maybe regulate it above and beyond that. I find that most paints, certainly acrylics, which we're going to use today, they'll atomise perfectly at 15 psi. Anything below that, I find that you get a trace around the edge of the pattern where you get slight speckles. That's because the pressure's too low. And I've seen that a lot on models. I've seen people who've been spraying tight patterns, airbrush patterns, and you'll find that there's little tiny dots all the way around. They're almost imperceptible. When you look at them, you can see it, and that's because the pressure's too low. So that's what I use. I know other people will have their own sort of feelings on that above and beyond.
I would say, unfortunately, my experience about cleaning the airbrush,
Yeah.
it's an absolute pest every time I want to use the airbrush. Even though I've run a lot of solvent through it, it's blocked up.
It shouldn't be.
Well,
It shouldn't be.
I really find it with Alclad, for example. When you clean out with Alclad,
With Alclad, simple products. The airbrush company make a product called Rema.
what is that? What is it?
It's basically just no, it's not cellulose. It is a solvent. It stinks like hell actually.
Yeah.
But you just put that through. And with Alclad, you only need to pass it through once. I find that if I've used Alclad in this brush and I want to use a standard paint afterwards, if I put Rema in it and use a cotton bud to clean it out and I just blast it out of the workshop door, I find that that's enough to clean it out.
I guess I use this is Lund in Norway. It's sort of cellulose type solvent.
Yeah.
But I find I'm also having to filtered a bit better. I agree, I use an airbrush all the time.
You need to be careful with Alclad because Alclad's not cellulose-based paint. It's not carried. It's not got. It's acetone-based.
They don't tell you what the solvent.
The solvent in Alclad is acetone. That's why it smells like that. It's not cellulose. And so if you're putting cellulose into acetone, you're going to get a reaction, and it's going to create a slightly thick kind of goo.
Be careful with that stuff because some of the rubber O-rings actually absorb acetone as well.
Well,
I'm sorry, I'm not trying
possibly. There isn't anything from here forward. From here forward, there isn't a rubber O-ring.
There is in a little O-ring around it.
There shouldn't be around here. This is it's just got a metal section. There isn't anything.
Yeah, but in a Hansen there is, for example.
Oh right. These are just. That's all. All this forward is just all metal work.
Yeah, what you were saying too about the problem with not being able to quite clean the airbrush all the time, you take that little tip and screw it back on. That
Yeah.
you just took off.
Yeah.
It's that little piece under there. You take it off with that little screwdriver that's always included, and you
Yeah.
just clean it out with a needle. That's for many years I didn't know either, and that was getting.
I have a Hansen that doesn't have that one. You just unscrew
The head assembly.
yeah.
It's a bit like the other brush. I'll show you that. I'll show you the cleaning.
You know, all I'm saying is that, in fact, you know, I find it's one of the most frustrating things. I have to go out and spraying the airbrush.
You might.
Spite of running massive solvents.
You might find that it's certain paints will react with other material that you put in there that you wouldn't expect them to, and certainly with Alclad. Alclad is so thin, most of it you can blow it through the brush anyway, and it'll just go through the brush. If you're putting cellulose in with Alclad, you'll probably find that it's reacting and it's actually creating a kind of a sticky substance in the brush, and that might be why it's giving up. But if you use something like I said, the airbrush company produces aerosol. They produce two actually. One is called Liquid Reno, and it just, in fact, if I was to cake this in, which I often do, and leave it with paint on that's dried, and I hold the brush, and I get the aerosol, and I just spray it like that, it actually burns its way through the paint, and it takes it off as the material is hitting the brush. Okay, and that's all you need to do, and then I'll just polish it up and clean it up that way. So try that.
I've had acrylics where the acrylic actually sealed, hardens before you put it.
Don't let it get to that stage. It's simple and straightforward as that. Acrylics will do that, and once they've hit that point where they're almost, because you're creating a plastic inside the brush, okay, what I tend to do is if I'm using this for an extended period of time, and I don't really want to clean it while I'm working on it. Say I'm working on spraying something in the morning, and I know I'm going to be working on it to the end of the day. What I do with this is that I fill it with a thinner, lacquer thinner, okay? And what that does is it seals it all up, because the brush, once the needle is in the end of the nozzle, you've created an airtight seal there, you create an airtight seal here with liquid, and it won't dry out. It's as simple as that. And then once you're finished with it, just blow it through.
You move on.
Okay. Right, so nobody else got any questions? No, are we okay? Yeah?
Do you use acrylics or enamel paints? What is your favorite?
Acrylics. Yeah, I use acrylics. For most of the models that I build, I use, to me, as acrylics, thinned with lacquer thinner, which is what I'm going to use today, which is this with a yellow top. I also use Gunsanyo acrylics as well. If I'm painting an aircraft, I'll use Gunsanyo acrylics, thinned with their own acrylic, lacquer thinner. Mr. Colour Thinner it's called. It's got a blue cap and a blue and white label. It's exactly the same material as this. This is, we can't get this in the UK anymore. I think there's some restrictions on the labelling, and so they've withdrawn it from sale, but you can get Mr. Colour Thinner, and that works just as well. But I've also been experimenting with extra acrylics. Extra acrylics are the closest thing I've ever seen in the paint to the way that a finish on an aircraft actually looks, because it's got no grain in it at all. So when you're looking at it and you spray it on and leave it to dry, if by using a material like micromeshing, I just gently rub across the top of it, it's absolutely flawless in terms of how smooth the finish is. Only they did it for armour, because it's just the most beautiful paint. Vallejo acrylics, which I know a lot of people use, model air acrylics, I just can't abide. I can't get past them at all. They are, I find them so difficult to use. I use them for hand painting a great deal, and all the detail painting I do on everything that I build, the hand painting is done with Vallejo acrylics, but the model air paints, I must have some sort of mental block about them, so I don't use those. But in terms of a standardised kind of toolkit that I use, I would use Tamir acrylics. Enamels, I've used in the past. I've used extra colour enamels, they work fine. And I occasionally will use an enamel to paint something if I can't get an acrylic as a substitute. The problem I have with enamels is I work really fast. You know, an aircraft model for me would be a Monday to Friday afternoon job for a magazine. It's, you know, you're working full time, you're under deadlines, you're working, you've got to get these things done, and so you end up picking the material you know is going to be impervious to everything else you put over the top of it. And this came into sharp focus a couple of weeks ago, because I was painting to me a Spitfire, 32nd scale Spitfire. A friend of mine had done all the sub-assembly work, and he painted it with extra colour, interior green and various blacks and all of that kind of thing. And he sent all the parts to me, and the finish was absolutely beautiful. And I thought, that's brilliant. They'd been painted for 10 days, okay, by the time I got them on my desk. And so I thought, well, I'll do all the washes and all the paintments and all of that kind of thing. And the thinner that I used went straight through. And all I was left with was just this kind of bubbled mass. And where this started off was, I don't know if anybody's actually seen this kit, was the engine bearer. It's got a firewall, and then it's got engine bearers on it that mounts it. There's a load of detail inside there, and I'm looking at this paint just go in front of me. Okay, and sort of as tempted as I was just to toss this thing in the bin, I then had to spend 2 hours getting this paint off using Mr. Muscle oven cleaner to clean all of this stuff off. And I'm sat there with a mess, basically, just trying to get through it. You can imagine the language in the workshop. Not for children, not very good, but so, and it was at that point I thought, I'm never going to use enamels again on a model I have to build quickly. So that explains why I don't use those. But enamels then come into play with washes on vehicles or detail or painting figures or those kind of things where you need to be able to use those short drying, those long drying times. So I would use something like that for those. But as a rule, it is to me all the way. It's by far the easiest paint to use, I think. As long as you don't leave it to stand in the pot for too long. Because once you open it up to the air and you start using it, when it comes to airbrushing it, if you put any thinners into there that takes it out of balance, you go back to the paint 6 months later and you'll find that it's separated out. So you've got to be careful with those kind of things. Okay? Yeah? We all done? Thank you very much, I'm off then. Right. Okay, we have a screen. Pardon?
You need a quick disconnect.
Yes, absolutely. Okay, so we have our brush, and we have some thinners, and the guys have kindly supplied some paint for me to use. So we'll just, can everybody see this okay? You can all hear okay. And tell you that this is exactly what you should do when you're working on it. Please don't think that that's the case, but this is the way that I do it, and it's always worked for me. Brush, little pipette, okay? I've got a friend who supplies me with these, he's kind of perfect. Fill a pipette up, and then put some thinners into the bottom of the cup, okay? And then we put some paint in. Okay, can everybody see this on the screen? Can you see the drips? Yeah? Everybody see that? That's what I meant. Okay, one drip at a time. So, put the cup back on. Okay. Right. great ways of learning how to use this tool is just to get a piece of paper like this, just a piece of plain white paper, and just kind of scribble around on it. Okay? And then you can see how the brush will work. You can see from the lines that you can get anything from a very fine line. Okay? That's about 1 millimetre, anything up to that, which is a couple of centimetres. This paint's actually a little bit thin at the moment, a little bit too thin. But you can see how that works. Can you see the lines? But you can also see how, if the paint is too thin, you get spider's legs. Can you see that? Let me bring it out. Okay. Piece of paper. Can you see this? Okay. Can you see the back? Yeah? Can you see the back? Okay. It's just a little test piece with the paint the way that you can see it on the screen. Like the smell of that? Go on, take that in. Yes. We like that smell. We like the smell of lacquer thinners in the morning. Okay, you see that? Okay. Now, these patterns here, you can see that there's a smooth line, a smooth area of overspray on those. Okay? There's no speckling too much. You can also see how fine you can get those lines as well. About, I guess that's about 1 millimetre. And that's about right for a model. You don't really need to get it any further down than that. But you can also see this effect here. These little spider legs that you get here. This is where the paint is too thin or the air pressure is too high. And that's what some people tend to suffer from when they're painting a model for the first time. And they spray the paint on, and the paint just spreads away from them. Okay? And that's because the air pressure is either too high or the paint is too thin. Okay, it's as simple and straightforward as that. If you're getting that all of the time when you're spraying onto a model, just adjust the paint slightly. Just put a little bit more paint in, or just turn the pressure down just a touch, and then do it again. And you'll find that if you do that, then you get a much cleaner look. So instead of that, you get something like that. Okay? Just turn the pressure down a little bit. You now see the difference, okay? Like that. That's the camera. You see that? Okay. So that's the
We got a bit of shadow there, Spencer.
Okay, you see that? So now it's right. Okay. If the paint's too thick, then you're going to get this. Where it's just not atomizing at all.
What do you mean by atomizing? Sorry.
Basically, that's when the paint runs through the brush, creates vaporizes, atomizes. Okay? In the same way as an aerosol can atomizes the material inside the can, that's what the airbrush does. basically a miniature paint can, okay? And instead of having a liquid air source within the can, you've got the compressor that creates that, okay? Now, on here, we can see that we have a smooth line, okay? Nice and smooth. On there, that's anything but. You see that? Okay. Now, this here is probably 60% thinners and 40% paint. This on here is the other way around. Okay. You see that? You see that? Yeah? You can see how the paint's too thick. Okay. Compare it to this. Compare it to this line. Okay. You see that? Paint's just simply too thick there, and it won't run through the brush properly. And often, that not only manifests itself in having edges that are anything but smooth when you're painting between two colours, but it also means that by the time this paint gets onto the model, it's probably almost dry too. Okay, so if you rub your finger across the surface of it, you're going to get a finish that's something similar to wet and dry paper. It's got a very pebbly finish. Okay, not what you want at all on the model. You want it to be nice and smooth. Okay, this finish will produce something that's nice and smooth. This finish here will produce something that's nice and rough. Now, of course, it could be argued that this might be useful if you're using it for a special effect on a model, maybe something that's outside, maybe I don't know, a painted wall, a stuccoed wall. You wouldn't want it too smooth. You could probably use something like this. It would probably create something that's nice. Also, you could perhaps use this kind of finish on the weathering on the underside of the vehicle, where it's actually, you know, quite good to have little splatters of paint all over the place. Okay. Now, sorry to keep bringing you in, Adam, but Adam works on the other principle. You thin yours a lot more than that. I would say that your paint's probably 30% thinners, 30% paint too. So it's much thinner, isn't it?
Well, that's just something I was going to ask you to talk about, because I think it'd be a good idea for everybody. I mean, I want to tell you, it's just a recommendation. It's my opinion, particularly the greens, I've found that I get like a texture on the surface.
Yeah.
What I'm talking about.
Yeah.
That's why I fit them so much. For black thinner, and also like a clear varnish or something. Like
Yeah.
It's clear.
Yeah.
And that reduces that. But yeah, but I'm finding these days more, I'm leaning more toward Europe and less toward the green thinner.
Yeah.
Because it saves time.
Yeah. There we go. We're all into saving time.
You're going to do 4 coats with very light amounts, or maybe only 2
Yeah,
with
yeah.
what you're doing here.
Okay. That's a good
But
point.
you get
Actually.
the detail on the photo and
Yeah.
the lighter amounts.
That's absolutely true. That's the other good point about this. About if paint's coming out of the brush and it's like this, then that is going to obscure some of the detail on the model as well. Okay. But also, your levels of frustration are going to be heightened by having the paint like this, because you're then going to have to go back to the model and think, I'm going to have to correct this because it doesn't look right. Whereas if you get it like this and it's nice and smooth before you start, you don't have to do any corrective work on the top of it. Okay.
Have we given you more piece of paper?
We're okay because I've got some bits I'm going to paint. These are just
Can
sort
you
of,
send it round?
I can do, yeah. These are kind of just this is sort of the basic ideas first before I brought some little bits of a model that we can that hopefully we can sort of paint. The idea of today, I don't know how many of you got. I guess you're all here tomorrow if you're staying in the hotel. The idea behind today is that we're going to paint up some little pieces of a 30-second scale measurement 109. Actually, we're going to use, so we can try out some different effects on those. Okay, and then tomorrow morning, the parts that we've painted today hopefully will be dry enough that we can work on them. They'll probably be dry enough tonight, to be fair, but we'll maybe then do a little bit of weathering on them, just sort of show some basic sort of ideas. So this is really sort of, you know, the basic bits and pieces before we get started. So we can kind of move on to actually painting the finish on the model, but this is, yeah, I can hand this around so you can kind of have a look and see what you think.
A stupid question maybe. I heard the discussion but didn't get the conclusion. You thin it more than you do.
Yeah.
What was the advantages of thinning it even more? Was it the drying time? Or?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I spoke very quick with that. I'm sorry. Okay. With the lighter, where he said where I thin it more to 30% paint and 70% thinner, I'll put on 4 or 5 coats of very thin paint that will cover less of the fine details like photo etch and small ribbons. I use a lot of photo etch. On the contrary, if you thin it to, what's your ratio?
About 60-40.
About 60-40, if the paint's thicker, But you can get it more done in one coat, you can paint it in half the time, and if you have more of a regular looking vehicle with less fine detail, which is very common, it depends on your subject, you save a little time.
Yeah, it's as simple and straightforward.
Thank you.
Of course, as well, the thinning aspect of it starts to come into play as well when you're working on special effects on a model. For instance, if you're painting, let's say you're painting a single colour aircraft, and instead of just weathering it, defining the panel lines, that kind of thing, and you want to do something else, maybe you want to pick out some of the panels and make them slightly lighter or slightly darker. You don't really want to be running over the top of those with another thick layer of paint. It would be better for you to thin it down, mask off those areas, and then just blow a light coat over the top. You want it nice and thin, almost like using a filter kind of idea behind that, but you can do that kind of thing with an airbrush. You don't want to be building up more and more layers on top of it that are thicker and thicker as you're going along. So then it starts to work. The other area, of course, if you're building an aircraft or even building a vehicle, say you want to put an exhaust stain running down the side of a Spitfire or something like that, the last thing you want to do is be using the same ratio of thinner to paint that you were using for the base coat to do that. So for that, you would crank the pressure right down, and you would probably go even 20% paint to 80% thinner, and then you just build the line up. And you'll probably find when you first spray it on, it's almost imperceptible. You can't really see it, but then once you start working on that, it'll start to build up. And so you work out over time which is the easiest way of doing that and how you're going to create the effects that you want with the ratios that you've got. It becomes common sense after a while.
Is that a general rule? If you thin it more, you go down in pressure, or not necessarily?
No, not necessarily. No, absolutely not. It just depends on what you're trying to paint and how confident you are when you're putting those colours on. So, for instance, with the Spitfire, if you're painting that kind of arc of colour from the exhaust, you probably want to make sure that you do that as carefully as possible. So bring the pressure down, and that way you're removing the risk of anything going wrong. You're removing the potential risk of spider legs, those kind of things, because it's going to come out very fine cloud of colour. Okay, yeah. Nice and simple, nice and straightforward. So that's kind of like the basics that you have. That's where the thinning kind of starts, and that's where we would begin. I've nicked all of those. So I've brought some little bits and pieces, some kind of wing sub-assemblies, and I bought some bits and pieces of a fuselage, just stuff that we can maybe have a look at, and we can try some different things. So if we begin by some sort of very basic preparation, and then we'll try spraying these and see what we come up with for a very basic camouflage scheme on a wing like this. Okay. Now this is just these are the plastic pieces that I've had kicking around on the workbench for the last 6 months. So they're kind of in a pretty poor state, really. They've just been glued together. There's nothing particularly interesting about these pieces. So as a result of them being on the workbench for so long, they've kind of got a bit scuffed up and a little bit damaged. So what we can do, just to prepare this for the finish, we can either prime this. A lot of modelers will spray primer over their models to prepare it. Others don't bother doing that too much. If you're building a model that's got more material in it than just the basic plastic, then I think you have to put a primer of some description on, put something on it, just to seal it. If you're using brass or using metal or resin, if you've got dissimilar materials on a model. If it's just a standard plastic model kit like this, I see no benefit at all from priming it, absolutely none whatsoever. Okay. To me, a paint will sit on a plastic model kit like this perfectly well without putting primer underneath it. Okay. And although there is a benefit to using primer when you're using a material like this, it's not always true in every case. extra acrylics is, and I think Vallejo as well, is kind of a material in itself, because this paint doesn't really bind to plastic particularly well. If I spray this onto just basic plastic and then I rub my finger across it, it'll come off, okay? And the same I found with Vallejo as well. If I put that onto bare plastic and rub my finger, it will take it off. It just doesn't seem to bind to the plastic as well as Tamiya paint does, okay? So in that case, I would recommend spraying a very thin coat of some kind of primer, whether it's a primer from a car dealership in a spray can, or whether it's Tamiya's primer or that kind of thing. But on the whole, I think you're probably okay if it's just a plastic model kit and you want to use either enamels, as the gentleman discussed earlier, or you want to use acrylics like Tamiya. I think you're okay with just the plastic. However, there is something that I do, and that's using this material. This is Scotch Brite, is its term. It's a scouring pad material, basically. That's what you can use. This grey Scotch Brite is a very fine one, okay? It's the equivalent of very fine steel wool. And I use it for just to kind of rub the surface of a model that I'm putting together, okay? And it just smooths everything out. It takes all of the impurities out of the panel lines and just gives it a nice kind of smooth finish. It also puts a billion tiny scratches into the surface of the paint, and that gives it a lovely key then for the paint that you're going to put over the top of it, okay? And I use this material for all of the aircraft that I build, every single one of them. I'll use this for, just to kind of clean it up. Okay. So once you've got a surface that you're happy with, a nice smooth surface, we can then think about putting some paint onto this. Okay. And so that's exactly what we'll do here, and we'll just kind of let's just run through just painting this as kind of quickly as we can, I guess. Right, remembering that this is now full of pure paint rather than paint and thinners, let's thin it back down so that we know where we are. I should say as well, before I start painting when it comes to surface preparation, the other little tools that I use are these things. I guess most of you have seen these, have you? Yeah. Have anybody not seen these?
Wife's got them.
Your wife's got them. Yeah. Wives tend to have these kind of things, don't they? And then they don't like to take them. Has anybody not seen these?
I haven't seen them.
These are sanding sticks. They're very rough-looking sanding sticks now because I haven't replaced them. But basically, what these are they're pieces of plastic card backed with very fine foam and then covered in a flexible sanding material. Okay. You would agree that that's a flexible sanding material?
Indeed.
Thank you very much, sir. Okay. These come in a variety of grades. They're colour-coded. Yeah, we like those. That one's, would you like to test the nice smooth one? That is indeed smooth, isn't it? That's like a baby's bottom. Okay. So they come in a variety of colours. Each of the colours reflects the abrasive grade of the stick. Okay. So you've got everything from a nice coarse one here. Okay. You would use this for cleaning up joints on panel lines and that kind of thing, and everything down to this one, which is kind of glass smooth. Okay. Yeah. Okay. And they've kind of been developed from the materials that the aerospace industry would use, or refinishing companies would use for polishing out Airbus jobs or canopies. These are used for polishing out canopies on aircraft. Okay, obviously not these little ones. You know, you wouldn't want to be sat there polishing a canopy on an F-15 with one of these. unless you'd slept with the commander's wife the night before. Okay, so you've got to the point where, you know, that's what these materials are for. Okay, there's a similar material that you can buy in sheets, that they get in sheets, called micromesh. Okay, now micromesh is a virtually identical kind of material to this, and you can use this material for cleaning up the surfaces of the. If that's for me, I'm not here. Okay, for cleaning up the surfaces of the model, and it'll give you a nice smooth finish, and you can use these things.
Does that replace wet and dry paper? Do you
No. I don't think these are aggressive enough to replace your kind of standard wet and dry paper. You would use those, but these would produce a nice smooth finish afterwards. These would be the perfect thing, going back to what Ed, isn't it? It's Ed. What Ed said for Alclad. If you were using Alclad and you wanted a really smooth underlying finish on Alclad before you put on sort of a base coat, these would be the perfect thing for that. It sounds like a sales pitch. It isn't a sales pitch, because these are marketed in the UK by an editor of a competitive magazine, but they are very good. Okay, so if you get the chance to use these, they're not very expensive. They're only a couple of quid each, something like that. You can buy them in sets. You can also, as you rightly said, you can buy similar material to these in local chemists. You know, you can buy them for doing nails, and I don't really want to go into that any further, because I don't really want people to think that I've bought them for that purpose. Okay.
Excuse me, do you use them dry or wet?
Dry. Okay, right, so right, so we have our airbrush. It's loaded with some paint. Just test if it comes out. Okay. When you're beginning to paint a model, please don't test that the paint's okay on the model by going, is the paint okay? You know, it's a mess. Okay. So, we have our paint, and we're happy that it's the right consistency to run through the brush. So let's just start painting this. Okay. Now, when you first begin with using one of these airbrushes, one of the things that's great fun to do is you just go, okay, and you think that's fantastic. That looks absolutely brilliant. Okay. Really, really bad idea doing it like that. Okay. So, let's start again. All I'm doing here is that at the moment, we've got the paint thinned with a lacquer thinner on the model, so I'm just using the air of the airbrush just to dry this off as I'm working on it, okay? Normally, I have a hairdryer sat by the side of me, okay, and I use a hairdryer to dry off layers as I'm building them up, okay? If you have a hairdryer and it's set on the sort of the cooler setting, then you'll be able to sort of work your way through that. You can, if you've got a hairdryer, and just blow it over on a warmer setting, as long as you don't put them on like that and go like that, because it'll just go. Okay. So we're painting our finish. Let's start at the end and work our way down. Okay, doing nice gentle strokes. Okay, you'll notice that as I'm spraying this, I'm starting off the model and I'm working my way across it. Nice, even strokes. You know, you can, by all means, especially using lacquer thinners, if you fancy having a nice afternoon, you can keep the brush on all the time and just go, and then it kind of atomizes above you, and it's kind of a rush. But that's not a very good idea, okay? So I would not recommend that anybody try doing that, okay? So just nice and thin. Keep the strokes as even as you can, and the paint flow as thin as you can. Hopefully on the screen you can see that that's starting to cover that nice and smooth. Okay? You see that? We turn it upside down. Let's do the underside. Start
You start at the tip normally? Or?
Yeah. What I tend to do, because when you're working on a subject, whether it's an aircraft or whether it's a piece of armour, you usually pick a point on a model and start on there first, okay, and then just keep it all in one area. Don't ever go on a model and then be spraying it like this, and then sort of move on to another area and spray it in a different direction. Always keep it the same direction. Paint has got, like plastic, which has also got a grain, paint has got grain as well, okay? So always try and work your way along it. I always find that, you know, that I'll pick one direction, and I find with an aircraft it's easy to go from tip onto the fuselage, turn it round, do the other side of the fuselage and work down to the other tip, and then turn it over, and then work from the top and then work your way down. And that way the paint is all running in the same direction. It sounds like it shouldn't matter, but I've often found that it does. And I find that if I don't do it like that, I'll miss a bit, okay? And then what I'll do is that once I've got the model coated to my satisfaction, I'll put it up to a light, and I hold it up to the light, and I'll look along it, and I can see where I've got slightly lower sections where there's not so much paint. And then what I'll do is I'll do it the other way. So instead of going lengthways, I'll go across it, in the same way that you would do if you were painting a house or something and you were rolling paint onto a wall. You don't just go like that. You know, you're always taught to, you know, to go backwards and forwards, okay, and then you'll find that you'll get a nice smooth finish, okay? So on this, that's exactly what we're doing. Okay. Right. So now, right, we've now got, you can see, on the top of this wing here, you can see a slightly highlighted piece there, okay? And it's slightly shiny. You see that?
Yeah.
Okay, it's slightly shiny. That's where there's been a build of paint underneath the finish. You see that? You see it reflecting in the light? You see that? Under here? Yeah, you all see that? Okay. It's not smooth. Says, don't spray it like this, okay? If you spray it like that, that's what's going to happen, okay? If you spray it like that, okay, you have it's nice and smooth and even, okay? Now, you're my guinea pig, okay? Just rub your finger across that. It's not entirely smooth, that, is it?
Not really.
No, okay? Would you like to do the same? You're my glamorous assistant for this afternoon, okay? Would you like to do the same, young man? Run your finger across that? It's not quite a baby's bum, that, is it? It's a little bit rough, okay? That's because matte paint naturally has a pigment in it, okay? It naturally has a grain. Gloss paint doesn't, because it has a leveling agent that's put into it, the gloss finish. Matte paint doesn't have that, okay? And so consequently, it's not quite smooth, okay? So one of the things that I'll do once I've painted my model is I'll go back to my sanding sticks, okay? Feel smoother?
Yes.
Good man. How about now?
Yes.
Aha, you see. Okay. Nice and smooth. Okay, that was just a little thing that we do before we kind of move on, okay? Because you're building up subsequent layers of paint on a model like this, okay? When you're painting with matte paint, you're constantly creating new layers of grain over the model, okay? So it's always good just to sort of work it out. So you can test Smoothness of that?
Will you do it between each layer or when you finish?
Rough. You see, between each layer. Okay? And it just takes a little bit of the you can, if you rub your finger across that one. Now that one. Okay? And that's basically just a rough spray job that we've done. Okay? And that's a few minutes.
But you brush that immediately after you paint it.
Yeah.
I can't do that with my brush. My paintbrush.
No.
They'll wait 3 days.
Absolutely. Okay, you see what I mean by this. But can you also see how quickly that's done and how quickly you achieve that kind of result? Okay, just by something nice and simple. Okay, working on this, and you can build up those layers and get to that level of finish in no more than, that's probably 2 minutes, I would say. Okay, so we've got a nice smooth finish on this. Okay, well, let's see if we can put a little bit of something else on it. All of you guys are going to be putting camouflage on, whether it's on an aircraft or whether it's on a military vehicle. We're going to get to that point. Okay.
Spencer,
Yes, ma'am.
when you are painting a large aircraft that wants like a 30-second scale piece, for example,
Yeah.
I found, like when I'm painting some of the larger armor pieces that I do, I take a small, like, medicine cup or a pill cup
Yeah.
that you buy at a pharmacy, and I just pre-mix everything right in there, fill that cup half up with paint, mix right, just pour it in as I go.
Yes.
You find that, do you ever do that?
Yes.
Quick.
Yeah, absolutely. Mixed up batches. If you're going to do, certainly if you're going to, unless you're convinced that you're just going to use the colours that are in the bottles, but if you want to mix other colours with that, I would say that's a very, very good idea. Okay, so we'll put a little bit of green on to this model, I think, and we'll paint a basic camouflage pattern.
You've still got the grey in there.
Yeah. I'm only doing this because I'm doing it quick.
Okay, all right, okay.
Yeah. Please don't. Yes, good point.
Yeah, but normally how would you clean it now in between?
How would I clean it? I would just put some thinners into it, or put some reamer into it. Use a cotton bud. I always have cotton buds. Okay. Put the thinner into the colour cup. Put cotton bud, and I just blow it out and it blows clear. Okay. You'll find that unless you're using colours like white or yellow or red, those kind of primary colours, if the brush is only 80% clean, there isn't going to be too much of a bleed out of colour from one colour to the next. Okay. By the time you've sprayed the colour that's in the colour cup through the head and through the tin, it's taken out the remainder of the original colour that's in there, and you're not going to have too much of that. The only times when you're going to need to think about that a little bit more is when you've got much lighter colours. So, you know, if you're whites, those kind of colours. But when it's greys and greens and camouflage colours on anything, whether it's an armoured vehicle or an aircraft or something like that, you really don't have to worry about that at all. Okay, right. We have our wing. We'll use the top surface of this to show, and we want to put a camouflage pattern on this. Okay, and for the sake of speed today, we'll have a bit of a play and show some ideas for masking off the camouflage patterns. But let's just start with a basic kind of idea of spraying a pattern. When I was much younger than I am today, to quote the Beatles, I would have my model and I would have my airbrush and everything, and I'd sit there and I'd go, okay, well, I need to paint this camouflage pattern, so I would go, okay, and I'd have kind of lots of overspray, and I think, okay, that's not how I really wanted it to look. Okay, so we basically have, can we see this? You see all that amount of paint that's on there? Okay. In the shadow. Okay, that's not the way we approach this. Okay, the way to paint the camouflage pan on anything, whether it's a vehicle or an aircraft, is to take it nice and easy. Okay, and what we do is we start off with something with a fine line. I've known modellers who've drawn a line onto their model, defining where the camouflage patterns go. So they'll just basically draw the camouflage pattern on, and then they'll fill in the line. I've always worried about doing that, I must admit, because I've always wondered about the line that's underneath and whether I'm going to see that through the paint. And I'm pretty convinced that I would be able to see that through the paint, so I'd rather avoid that if at all possible. Okay? So what we do is we make sure that the paint's flowing through the brush, and then we go onto the model and we spray away from us. Okay? Never spray towards yourself, a bit like using a knife, never spray towards yourself, because if you think about it, it's a common sense approach. If I'm spraying onto a line on an aircraft, and I'm spraying the camouflage, and I spray that way, where's the overspray going to go? It's going to go that way, okay? So you always spray into the line, always spray into the pattern, okay? Never spray away from the pattern, okay? So let's say that we're on here, we're going to put a block of camouflage in this bit here, okay? So what we do is we spray the outer lines, and then we spray into the pattern, okay? So let's start off with our
You're very close to the plate. Does that keep a very fine line?
yeah. Okay, so we've got our first line, okay? Turn the model round, and then so we now have two lines on here, okay? This is the area inside those two lines that's going to be green, okay? By spraying the first edges, that creates a nice tight pattern for us to work against. And then it's simply a case of going back onto the model, spraying over the line, and then just open the brush up. And then when you get about halfway into the block that you're painting, turn it around and start again. Okay. So, very quickly, the pattern. You can see, as I did before, you can see the difference in the amount of overspray on this pattern compared to on this. Okay? You can see it's like a ghosted edge. You see that? A ghosted edge. Okay? You see that? Okay. In place. We can go back over it as well. It's dry now. This is only really the first coat. So let's go back over the top of it again. In actual fact, having said earlier about those pencil lines, I can still see the pencil lines.
Yeah, I'm sure it's shot. If it's lead, if it's a pencil.
Okay, so we've now got a freehand pattern on there. Okay, but let's say that rather than painting it freehand, we want a line that's tighter than that. We can either mask it off and use masking tape like this, which will give a nice sharp edge. In fact, we'll perhaps do that now. Okay, so we've put masking tape on this, as you've no doubt all seen 1,000 times before. Or we can use a floating mask, piece of paper. I haven't got a knife to cut this in an interesting pattern, but we can still do this. Okay, so little roll of tape underneath. We put our piece of paper over the top, piece of card. So this is actually floating above the surface of the model, only a couple of millimetres. Okay. Now we spray away from that. So we have two new effects. Okay. Start with the lady at the end. We have two new effects. You can see it's nice and soft there, and sharp. Okay. Sharp. Okay. This is a sharp edge from the tape. This is a floating mask. You can see that it's got a soft edge. Okay. You see that? Okay. This kind of effect is perfect on a lot of post-war vehicles. Pass that. Post-war aircraft, RAF aircraft in particular. A lot of modern NATO jets have a soft edge on them. There's no kind of real overspray. And a lot of aircraft during since the Second World War have had their finishes painted on by putting rubber mats over the top of the aircraft, and then they spray over the top of the rubber mat so that you get a very soft kind of feathered edge. Okay. Some aircraft are painted with freehand, but often because they have prescriptive patterns, and the patterns are the same on all of them, they don't vary, they use the rubber mats, hang the rubber mats over the top of them, blow them over with paint, take the rubber mats off, and you get a soft kind of defined edge. Okay? And those three techniques really are the only three techniques that you ever need to use to paint every camouflage pattern that you're ever going to see on an aircraft. Okay? Either it's sharp-edged, where they've actually masked off the camouflage pattern. 50s RAF jets are a good example of that. 50s RAF jets have got a sharp, defining edge between the colours. Okay? Modern RAF jets, it's 1970s, 1980s aircraft, they haven't. They've got a soft edge between the two colours. Okay? Second World War aircraft or Southeast Asian, American aircraft, they tend to have a softer kind of edge as well. Okay? And those three techniques will create everything that you need to produce those effects. Okay? And then we can do what we did before. If we want to make sure that these are nice and smooth, we can kind of go over these. This is an old T-shirt that I tend to use. I put this by the side of the workbench. Okay, just rub it with this. It isn't going to take any of the paint off. Okay, nice and easy, nice and smooth. Yeah, and it creates that. And then what we can do with this, once we're happy and comfortable with this, just seal it in with something. Okay, seal it in with a finish. I've started using, to seal finishes on models, a Games Workshop product called Purity Seal. Purity Seal comes in a large aerosol can, and it costs £5 or £6. Do you have Games Workshops in Norway? No? Yeah, you do? And Purity Seal is a fantastic material. It's a satin varnish, and you can spray it over absolutely everything. it seems, with impunity. I can certainly spray it over with Tamiya paints. If I paint a model like this, I can spray Purity Seal over the top of this right now and it wouldn't touch the underlying paint.
Where do you buy that?
Games Workshop.
This was instead of Future, that used to be the big
Yeah. Well, you can still use Future. Future creates a glossier finish. The great thing about Purity Seal is it's literally rock solid underneath something else. You could put anything over the top of it, you know, other than acid, and it will allow you to work over the top of it without ever leaving anything to dry underneath it. Okay, I've worked on a model, the Spitfire that I mentioned earlier on. Other than the rather unfortunate cock-up with the enamels, I painted and weathered the Spitfire ready for publication in 2 days using Purity Seal. I sealed every single section in with it, decals, weathering, layers, everything.
So it's like a sand varnishing or
No, it just comes straight out of the can.
spray it on without it.
Yeah, and it goes, and from the can, if you warm the can up like you do with a normal aerosol, and you spray it on using, just put a dust coat on and then a wet coat, it goes silk smooth. And it's just fantastic, absolutely brilliant material. You can sort of, you know, put it on with that. Okay. So using those kind of very basic ideas, we can create these effects on a model, creating camouflage patterns, that kind of thing. And of course, by using these simple techniques as well, you can use that for all of the other techniques that you want to use, whether you're doing an airline with sharp-edged patterns on from the corporate colour schemes, whether you're creating camouflage patterns, whether you're doing single aircraft colours, all of that kind of thing, you can do it using these 3 techniques. It's as simple and straightforward as that. Okay. Now the same techniques work as well. If we're building a Messerschmitt 109, or any German aircraft for that matter, we're probably not really going to get away from using modelling. Also, if you're building a World War II vehicle of some description, certainly German vehicles or Italian vehicles, that kind of thing, you're not really going to get away from the idea of producing sort of mottled camouflage schemes on those. And again, they're fairly straightforward to do, so long as you don't go at it like a bull in a china shop. Okay, and I've seen some really lovely models spoiled by approaching this kind of modelling on these aircraft in a kind of ham-fisted way. Now, I appreciate that during 1944, on the front line in Russia, the last thing the poor German guy with the air gun was thinking is, I wonder what Spencer's going to do in years to come when he comes to painting this model. He's really going to want to have a nice finish on this. So what I'll do is I'll stand there with my paint gun, and I'll think, well, where's that going to go on that tail? Oh no, I'll spray a little bit on the top of the tail, and then I'll spray a little bit at the bottom and everything. No, they didn't do that. They probably went up to it, bolted the gun onto the compressor and just went bollocks to this, went shh, 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 all the way along, okay, and did that. That's what they did. You look at Japanese aircraft from the Second World War, you look at the modelling on the Ki-61s, there's paint running off the models. Because they were having their asses kicked by the Americans at this point, and all they wanted to do was spray the camouflage onto the aircraft so that the pilots didn't get killed when they were up in the air, or they didn't get shot at while they were on the ground. Okay, that's what they were thinking. So when we're talking about creating miniatures, and we're talking about airbrushing those effects onto a model, that's not what they did in the field. You know, it's like if you look at a Tiger tank in the models of Tiger tanks, the amount of times you see the camouflage pants and they go up off the vehicle, and then you'll see it, and you'll see a beautiful wavy line, and it goes all the way around and then drops down onto the other side. Physically impossible to do that. Okay, you have a 60-ton Tiger that's 4 meters high. And the guy has got the spray gun, he's put a little ladder up against the side of it, just in case. He's started to spray the wheel, and he's climbed up the ladder while he's still spraying. He's walked all the way along the engine deck, and then he said to his mate, bring the ladder round. And then he's dropped it down the other side. No, it didn't work like that. What happened was that there they were with the spray gun, and they sprayed up the side, and he stopped, climbed onto the vehicle, and then he sprayed another pattern. And then he climbed off the vehicle, and then he sprayed another pattern on the other side. It would be impossible to do it any other way if you think about it, okay? So, but that's fine, but in miniature terms, we don't really want our models to look like that. We don't want it to look with all paint runs down the side, because your mate's going to come up to you and say, you know what, your model's got paint runs on it. Well, it's supposed to be there. I painted those on. No, you didn't. You got spider's legs because your paint was too thin. No, that's what they did on the real model. On the real vehicle, they had spider's legs. Honestly, I've got the photo. No, you haven't, clown. Mark it down in the competition. We don't want them to do that. That's not how it works in model world. We like everything to be all nice and clean, which is fine, okay? Because ultimately we're creating something that's attractive to the people that we're showing it off to. We're creating a dream, we're creating an effect, we're creating something that's interesting to look at. That's where model making differs from the real world. We can create our own idea of reality. Okay? So when it comes to producing the modelling on a model, we have the first thing that you would do is you would get your model and you would think, well, I'll just spray spots on it. That looks okay. We have a spotty model, okay? Probably not that interesting, okay? So what we do is the same way as we did with the wing. We start small. Whenever you're working on a pattern for anything, start small and then build it out, okay? So, we go on to the area that you want to start. Usually when I'm working on an aircraft like this, I tend to create sort of larger patterns around the outside and then work my way into those. Okay, rather than just putting a pattern on the edge of the fin, I like visually, I like the way it looks, to have the fin defined by darker areas and then building the patterns inside those darker areas. Okay, so let's say we start on the edge. Actually, this paint's a little bit too thick. Okay, test the paint again. So we're just working small patterns, little dots of colour. And the other thing that we're trying to do is human brains don't work in a random way. We like to think in straight lines. And one of the things that I've seen on models before now when I've been doing shows and competitions and exhibitions is I've seen a modeller who obviously likes a certain pattern. And they've thought, oh, that looks quite good. So they've got their pattern and they've gone, I like this kind of pattern, okay? So you see these then appear all over the model. Okay, well, I like that one too, that's nice. And then, so by the time you finish, the model looks like a noughts and crosses board. Okay, so what you need to do is you need to try and think in a random way, which is quite difficult to do, because if you're painting a model like something of this size, that's just got a lot of modelling all over it, it's very difficult to keep creating new models, if you see what I mean, okay? But we try and keep it as random as we can. And in this case, the way I do it is that I find that I keep the brush on. So rather than going, I actually keep the brush on at all times. And I literally just bounce it across the surface. And because I'm putting so little paint on, as I'm moving the brush across the surface of the model, it's not really depositing that much paint on the surrounding areas. It's only really working on the areas that I let the brush stay on. And I vary the patterns, I vary the size. Again, if you think about the poor guy who was in the field, that's what he would have done. He wouldn't have sat there and thought all of these need to be 6 inches by 6 inches by 6 inches. He'd have sat there and he'd have just gone, and then he'd have thought, oh God, I missed a bit. And he would have just gone into that and he would have filled it in. That's how he would have thought at the time. Because that's natural if you think about it, that's the way we all think. If you've missed a bit and you've painted a wall, you think, oh, I need to put some in there. That's what he would have done. But he'd have done it quickly as well, he would have put in. Okay, so we have basically two versions, okay? This is the Spencer Pollard Guide to Modelling 1983, okay? And this is the later one. You can see how much more interesting the second one looks, okay? Put them together. Okay. This is probably fine on some aircraft even exhibit this kind of like circular pattern on. German aircraft really didn't have that. They were way more random than that. It's kind of ironic really that for a country that is so prescriptive in everything else they do and so sort of technically adept, when it came to camouflage patterns, they approached it in a kind of like a topsy-turvy, random kind of way. No other country during the Second World War really approached modelling in the same way that the Germans did. They created such random kind of patterns that broke everything up, whether it was on military vehicles or whether it was on aircraft. Okay, so we can see two different versions. Can everybody see this? Okay, we can see this. Yeah, you can see the difference between the two. Okay. And you can see on this one here, I've not really lifted the brush off at all. And yet it's not really deposited that much paint over the surface of the rest of it. The standard paint thickness that I used before. Okay. So if we put a little bit more thinner into this. Okay.
You reduced the air supply.
Yeah, reduced it down, thinned it down slightly more. Quite warm in here, so you'll find as well the paint will slightly atomise on the tip of the brush and it'll dry on there as well. So.
I think that's what I was talking about when I was discussing at the beginning.
I'll show you a way around that in a minute. So one of the things, the way that manifests itself and makes it a little bit better is that you can do much smaller models. You see that? Okay. So when you've got the paint much thinner and the air down, you can get much finer models. Okay. With one of these high-end airbrushes, you can actually airbrush the face of a 54mm figure with one of these airbrushes. Highlights, shadows, everything. Okay? You can airbrush the eyes, the cheeks, everything with one of these once you start cranking it down. Okay? you can get these kind of effects. There's no reason why, I'm using a 30-second scale model here because it's easier to use, but there's no reason why these effects couldn't be used on a 144th scale model. You would get the same kind of effects. Okay, so by dragging everything down and dragging all of the pressure down, that's what you'll get. Okay, going back to your point about the paint drying on the tip of the airbrush, there's a very simple way around that. And that's why we use these things. Okay, these things are an ever-present in my workshop. Okay, cotton buds. I use them by the thousands. Okay, long since needed to use them on a child younger than 6 months. Okay, but they are very, very useful tool to have in. Okay, you have your airbrush. Okay, let's say that the inside here is kind of dried on the end of the brush, and that happens with acrylics. Happens way more with acrylics than it does with enamels, because acrylics obviously dry that much quicker. And if you think about it, if you're using the airbrush to dry off a finish like that, if you've got paint passing through here and air passing over the top, it is naturally going to build up. Okay, and over the years of use, the tip of the needle inside the airbrush becomes abraded anyway, so it's got a very fine texture to it, and that picks up the paint. Okay, but there is a simple way of doing this. You get your cotton bud, you dip it in your thinners, and you just put it in the tip like that, and you twist it. Okay, can you see how that's gone dirty? Okay, blow it through, and it's done. That's it. Okay. Now, all airbrushes are designed differently. This one has got a separate head assembly here, and then inside the brush, there's a small nozzle. Okay, and there is the needle passing its way through the nozzle. Okay. So if you just do that and then screw this back on, that should be all you'll need to do on an airbrush painting session, okay, until we come to strip the brush down. And I will show you how we do that at some point.
Do you ever use one of these for delaying things?
Say that again, please.
Do you ever use there are chemicals you can add to it?
Retarder?
To retard it, yeah?
No. I've never found the need to use that. I know people that do, but I've never found really the need to use that. Okay. So these kind of the basics of those kind of techniques. Okay. Now, has somebody got a watch on?
Yeah. It's 7 minutes past 2.
We've been going for a while.
Have I been going for an hour yet?
Yeah.
Are we okay? Yeah, I think so. Nobody's coming in yet. I'll just show you one more little trick that a lot of people talk about. And
You've been going for an hour and a half for that.
have I?
Yeah.
I think you just like to listen to yourself talk.
I do. I love it. So just very, very quickly before we start, is pre-shading. Okay, pre-shading is one of those things that gets talked about more often than anything else, and it causes more arguments on the internet than absolutely everything else. Okay, and pre-shading is in much the same way as modelers who use matte black or black as a base coat. It's become something that people either choose not to understand or just genuinely don't understand how it works. Okay, and basically all you're doing is you're forcing an area of shadow into a surface before you put a colour onto it. Okay, just to make the surface a little bit more interesting. Okay, so I'll show you how that works in practice. Okay, just very quickly. We have a dark colour here. I'll use NATO black. NATO black is actually very dark green. It's not black at all. Certainly not, to me, its colour isn't black. Okay. Yeah, XF16. Okay, so put a little bit of colour in, so that we've got a nice dark finish. Okay, and just use this for defining panel lines, just sort of breaking things up. Okay. And what we do is we just very randomly paint over panel detail. Okay? So you get lines. These are just the pan lines that are in here. Okay. And what this can be used for is just to impart kind of colour tones across the surface of a model. Whenever you look at a real object, whether it's a carpet or the wall or everything, you look in this room, there are colour tones all the way around that shift with light and shade. Okay, and this just kind of imparts that idea into the surface. The way I do it, that's the traditional way, is you just spray lines like that. Okay, but I think there's a more interesting way of doing it. Okay, and that is to get that and then to go over the top of it and just scribble. Okay, so basically you've got a kind of a scribbling pattern. You all see this? Okay, it's just basically you just turn it on and just like this. Okay, just kind of scribble onto it. Right, so we have a dirty looking kind of surface.
Just tipping it out.
Normally I tip it into the bin, but I haven't got a bin. And I'm also trying not to get it on my nice work shirt as well. Otherwise they're going to be asking me about it. Okay, so we have our sort of dark colour there. Let's use, this is sky, because it's a nice light colour that we can use. I have to thank the organisers for allowing me to use their paint stocks. Okay, so we have a nice colour inside here. Okay, so what we then do is we go over what we've already painted. Okay, nice and light. Again, following the ideas from earlier, just go over it in a nice, even coat. So now we have two more comparisons. Okay? This is the colour that we used earlier on. You remember the grey that we put on? That's just a flat shade of grey. This is a pre-shaded colour. Okay? Okay, it's not quite finished yet, but it gives you the idea it's a little bit more interesting. Okay? Because we've already kind of forced into the detail areas where that you would have natural kind of staining. This then gets accentuated out when you're working on it by washes and oil paints and that kind of thing. You see this? Yeah? Okay. Okay. At the moment it's a little bit kind of coarse, a little bit rough. You can see that? Yeah, you see the difference between the flat colour and the pre-shade. Okay. Yes? 5 minutes? Yeah. Okay. So that gives you an idea of where you can work. Now if you quickly, I've got to quickly wrap up. But if I then go back over the top of it again, okay, we've toned that down now. You see that? It's not quite as forced as it was before. Okay, so you're not seeing defined dark lines. And that's where a lot of people go wrong when they're using this technique, is that you see models and they've got a patchwork quilt over the top of them, where you've got lines. Okay, real aircraft don't look like that. Military vehicles certainly don't look like they've got dark edges around them. They're softer and more subtle than that. Okay, but that is a way of making the surface a little bit more interesting. Okay, and then tomorrow, if you guys come back tomorrow, what we'll do is we've got our finishes. We'll show how from that we'll accentuate that out, and we'll add some weathering onto that. Show how we can make that a little bit more interesting again using some oil colours. Okay, but that's a nice starting point for some very simple ideas that we can show you tomorrow. Thank you very much for listening.
Til seminar nummer 2 her i dag. I dag så det den verdensberømte modellfiguren Per Olav Lund som skal fortelle. Det spesielt dere på første rad der må avstå fra å løpe opp på scenen med sånne ting sånn som jeg måtte tidligere. Per Olav skal snakke om væringsteknikker med salt og muligens noe hårspray. Alt ettersom dagsjumøret. Minner igjen på at 50 kroner for alle seminarer, dere som har dårlig samvittighet, betaler etterpå. Hjertelig velkommen, god fornøyelse, stor applaus til Per Olav Lund.
Takk for det, Martin. Ja, jeg tenkte jeg skulle vise litt egentlig det motsatte av hva Spencer holdt på med før i dag. Han har gjort alt for å få en smooth finish. Jeg skal egentlig gjøre alt for å få en mest jævlig finish. Jeg skal vise litt hvordan vi kan simulere rust på modeller. I første omgang med bruk av salt. Vanlig, ikke helt vanlig bordsalt, litt grovere salt enn det, men sånn havsalt. Så jeg tenkte jeg skulle begynne rett på. Jeg vet ikke om dere ser på skjermen der, om jeg kan gjøre alt her, eller hvordan vi får bare begynne, så skal jeg holde opp og forklare hva jeg bruker for noe. Ok, resultatet som jeg kommer til å få her, det veldig ekstremt, men jeg prøver å gjøre det litt ekstremt, for at det lettere å vise hvordan vi kan bruke disse teknikkene. Det jo bare når du prøver på dette selv, og gjøre dette etter smak og behag, og prøve seg fram. Det riktig. Men uansett, basen for å lage i dette tilfellet en bil som har fått seg noen alvorlige rustknekk her, det å lakkere karosseri i en rustbrun farge. For å se det her. Hvordan bil det aner jeg ikke. Det sier litt om hvor mye jeg bygger om sånne biler, men det veldig artig å prøve å eksperimentere på moderne biler, synes jeg.
Det en kupé.
Det en kupé, ja. Som Mustang også. Det vel en Ford Mustang da. Vel, som sagt, en basic brun rustfarge i bånd. Så har jeg noen Vallejo akrylfarger her, forskjellige rusttoner. Litt lysere og litt mørkere brunfarger. Mens jeg finner fram litt maling og begynner på dette, så tenkte jeg kan sende ut et eksemplar. Kan dere se på litt hvordan jeg hadde tenkt resultatet skal bli? Vel, det jeg synes et greit verktøy til å bruke når du skal simulere rust, det faktisk en vanlig kjøkkensvamp. Men du bruker som pensel. Dabber på rustfargene. Egentlig ikke noe mening med det, bare prøver å bryte opp den grunnfargen, så den blir litt mer interessant. Jeg har en liten utfordring her, for jeg oppdaget det når jeg tok opp den boksen jeg har med alt utstyret, så hadde en liten beholder med whitesprit lekk utover alt, så svampen litt gjennomtråkket av whitesprit, men jeg tror det skal gå bra. Svamp faktisk et veldig bra maleverktøy når du også skal være på søleffekter og sånne ting. Det helt greit å bruke. Skippa maling for eksempel. Du skal ha en ting til å se kanter på for eksempel stridsvogn du skal være avflasset maling. Bruk en svamp. Veldig forsiktig litt maling på og dabb på, så får du ofte en fin effekt. Og dere må prøve seg frem. Da har vi en rask tørk. Så det frem med saltbørsja, eller saltet. For å få saltet til å feste seg på modellen, så bruker du vann. Reit vann. Hveter overflata. Med vann. Så det om å gjøre da å spre på det saltet, og på de der du synes det er logisk at kanskje rysta legger seg på en bil. Nå legger jeg litt rått og røden på her nå, for dette blir litt mer sånn for å demonstrere hvordan jeg kan gjøre det. Men det er ikke utenkelig at disse bilene ruster kanskje overalt. Sånn, vann gjør da at saltperlene fester seg. Denne teknikken er også fin å bruke hvis dere bygger dioramaer med for eksempel bygninger og skal ha avplasset maling på en murvegg, så er det glimrende å bruke salt. Sånn. Kan vi legge litt på hjulbuene, det er vel et naturlig sted kanskje? Forsiktig på vann, så salt som sagt fester seg. En del av dette saltet vil nok begynne å blåse av når det begynner å edrusje, men det er ikke farlig, for det er mye som sitter igjen. Jeg har faktisk mikset 3 typer salt det er sånn på denne blandingen her. Det er sånn vanlig bolsalt, og så er det noe som heter havsalt, og så er det noe som heter maldonsalt. Sånn. For å speede opp at vannet tørker litt fortere, så går det fram og ordner her. Sånn. Da ser det sånn. Så er det da å begynne å finne den fargen du skal ha på bilen, eller sånn grunnfargen på bilen. Da har jeg valgt hvit, for det synes jeg er greit, for da får du en litt mer ekstrem kontrast mellom rusta og grunnfargen på bilen. Hei?
Er det kritisk hvor mye vann du bruker? Så det får at salt løser?
Ja, bruker du for mye vann, så kan saltet faktisk løse seg opp og bli mer eller mindre flytende. Så det er om å gjøre ikke bruke for mye vann, det er sant det. Da skal dere prøve dette, så anbefaler dere bruker litt god tid til å legge på saltet der som det er realistisk å ha det på. Dere som bygger panser, bruk også gjerne teknikken er interessant hvis du skal ha SKALA, for eksempel hvit kamuflasjemåling. Perfekt, så bruker salt.
Ikke panser, ikke for fly med vinterkamuflasje.
Unnskyld?
Ikke vinterkamuflasje på et fly. Blir det for grovt?
På fly?
Ja.
Jo, jeg tror det vil fungere veldig bra der også.
Ja.
Ja, absolutt. Til og med er ikke en del av disse japanske flyene som har en del ekstrem avflassing av maling.
Ja.
Der tror jeg salt vil fungere perfekt.
Salt reagerer med metallmåling.
Det aner jeg ikke. Ja, det vet jeg ikke. Kanskje. Hårspray og salt er mye likt. Mye den samme teknikken, eller mye samme resultatet. Du får ofte litt røffere kanter med bruk i salt. Bruker du hårspray, så har du litt mer kontroll, for da får du akkurat det du vil ta. Mindre skala er nok helt fra hårspray og foretrekke. Sånn. Spinner vi opp redden her litt. Det jeg normalt ville gjort nå, det er gått under kjøkkenspringen, og så bare rennende vann og latt saltet egentlig renne av. Det har vi ikke mulighet til her. Så da skal vi prøve å bruke en pensel. så sitter ikke i verden at du får rødba da med en litt stiv pensel. Og rusta kommer jo da til syne. Så er det snakk om da prøve å tone kontrastene ned litt grann mellom det hvite og det ruste, og det er klart, nå er den hvite fargen veldig, veldig ren og pen, og det vil jo naturlig nok ikke være på en bil som rusten og fæl. Det vil være både forma og være av tid til annen. Så da bruker jeg litt wash. En mørk wash her sånn. Jordslag i lakken. Litt godt med vors på penselen, og så rett og slett bare sprute på sånn. Og tørke. Sånn. Skal du lage litt ruststreker etter, eller streker som har av rennende, håper jeg, rustvann. Litt oljemåling. Litt oljemaling, bruker da litt rustfarget oljemaling direkte på de feltene som er åpnet av rust. Bitte litt grann bare.
Spesielt grunn til å bruke blyant.
Det er for at jeg ikke hadde noe annet her. Jeg ville helt klart brukt en veldig tynn pensel, men det har jeg ikke med meg. Og den funket bra. Sånn, så er det da sånn. Den er jo oljebasert selvfølgelig. Så litt whitesprit på penselen der. Så det om å gjøre bare veldig forsiktig. Touche bort i de små dottene med oljemaling, så du drar den oljemalingen nedover, og ser ut som det er rust som er rent nedover. Så vidt toucher borti. Det handler litt om, synes jeg, når du holder på med sånne ting, det er egentlig bare å sitte og kose seg og prøve seg fram hele tiden, og hele tiden utvikle og finne på nye ting underveis. Du vet sjelden hvordan resultatet blir til slutt, men her er det egentlig bare å, er ikke fornøyd, så lakker du litt oppå, og så prøver deg på nytt igjen. For er det som sagt ikke avhengig av å ha en super finish. For det er naturlig at den overflata på denne bilen er litt røff og preget av tidens stand. Nå er denne forholdsvis våt enda, så jeg vil ikke sende den rundt, men dere kan komme opp og se på den etterpå. Men det er jo veldig likt det resultatet dere så på den bobla her sånn. Sånn. Det var den teknikken jeg tenkte du skulle vise deg. Så jeg har også lyst til å vise og komme litt med tips om hvordan dere kan lage enkle bygninger. Ved bruk av også forholdsvis enkle materialer. Og da tenkte jeg rett og slett på styrofoamblokk, som du får kjøpt på byggvarer, og som du ofte finner slengende rundt omkring på byggeplasser. Et utrolig lett og fint materiale å jobbe med. Jeg har en bygning her. Et par kvelder så har du en bygning som heter. Veldig lett og fint å jobbe med. Ta malinga godt, og det er lett å bearbeide. En ting, viktig med styrofoam, bruk for Guds skyld ikke tunge whitesprit-baserte medier. Da kan du få en overraskelse, for den smelter rett og slett. Så jeg holder meg stort sett til vannbasert, akrylbasert maling, og da funker det bra. For å lage en enkel mursteinsvegg.
Du sa med maling, men hvordan lim bruker du når du...
På dette?
Ja.
Det er også en liten utfordring egentlig, men jeg prøver å bruke stort sett hvitt lim. Vanlig trelim. Vanlig trelim. Det funker greit. Det som kan være litt med trelimet er at når du tar to veldig tette plater sammen, så blir det så tett at trelimet får antageligvis ikke luft og tørker ikke ordentlig.
Vannbasert
Ja, det er helt sikkert en del lim. Jeg vet det er en del lim i byggvarer som for å få til påtaket som du kan bruke til sånt noe. Uansett, bruker kun et vanlig skalpell. Og linjal. Og skjærer rett og slett fogene. Inn sånn. Nå lager jeg også disse mursteinene blir forholdsvis store. Det ikke noe 35 jeg lager nå, men vi tar en litt større, for det litt raskere og enklere å vise. Dette kan jo gjøres i alle skalaer. Jeg bryr meg ikke så veldig om å bruke millimeterpapir for at alle mursteinene skal være helt på millimeteren like, for det synes jeg blir mer liv i en vegg hvis det litt variasjon, og ikke for uniformt. Så tenkte jeg bare skulle vise hvordan dette hjørnet her med murstein. Men når du bruker et skalpell sånn på den styrofonen, så blir den foga så tynn at den har ikke noe effekt av. Bruker da rett og slett et barberblad, og setter den ned i sporet og bikker frem og tilbake. Det som fint med styrofonen da, at han beholder formen når du har bikket den i en stilling, så holder han seg der, han siger ikke tilbake igjen. Styrofonen forholdsvis bløt, så du skal være litt forsiktig når du holder på og ikke få for mye sår inn, for da det kan være vanskelig å bli kvitt. Hvis ikke de sårene kommer etter gode og ser naturlig ut i form av ødeleggelse på den veggen du lager. Så.